As we're moving through the semester, what I hope you're recognizing is we started out with talking about energy and energy through to the atmosphere and how the energy through the atmosphere moves. We discussed water and water in the atmosphere. We've introduced that into the genesis of climate and climate conditions and climate change and weather patterns and weather and climate associated now with some geology, which we're going to get to next, are the big driving factors for which plants and animal associations are located where. So that brings us to biogeography, and biogeography is a sister discipline to ecology where biogeographers like myself are looking at why a particular species or a group of species in the form of an ecosystem exist in a particular location, or how that when that location's conditions change, what are the expectations for the change that are going to occur in that ecosystem. So we're looking at location-based phenomena that produces ecological associations and ecological relationships. The ecologists, like Ian Rene, who's a colleague of mine over in biology, as an ecologist, he's looking at the relationships first, and those relationships could be with chemical compositions in soils or temperature compositions, but those are secondary, or the biogeography is secondary to these other drivers. The biogeographer is looking at the location as the driver, the conditions that set up the ecology, and the ecologist is looking at the system of the ecology that happens to be on a location. Then what are those locational characteristics? So when we start talking about biogeography, or ecology for that matter, we recognize the macro scale biology, which is the biosphere. And like the hydrosphere that we've just touched on, or the atmosphere that we've been spending a lot of time on, the biosphere is the inclusive composition of organisms across our planet, across the Earth. And the thing about the biosphere is we don't know what its limits are. We're only learning about the ultimate locations of the biosphere as an ever-expanding condition, because humans have a limitation on where we can go and what we can explore. And over the last century, those limitations have been minimized because of technologies that we've produced. So we've been able to engineer submersibles that allow us to go into deep ocean depths where at one time we thought was void of life, but now we know that there's rich teeming ecosystems hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meters into the ocean where there's virtually no sunlight or no sunlight at all. That the temperatures we would have thought had at one time precluded rich biomes and ecosystems to exist, we now know ecosystems thrive. Temperatures and geothermal vents in Yellowstone National Park on a terrestrial landscape, or subaquatically in geothermal vents off the coast of Mexico where temperatures can be 300 degrees Fahrenheit. We now know life exists. We've got a recognition that we've got life in deep ice cores in Antarctica, life in deep salt inclusions that are in caves in the lithosphere of our Earth, and that there's lots of suggested evidence to lead us to believe that there's life in the higher levels of the atmosphere. So we don't know where life stops, essentially, but we do know that life does exist in places that we hadn't anticipated it before, and to remove the veil of ignorance that we probably are going to start to find life in even more strange locations than we had ever imagined. And it's the question is to figure out, well, how is it that life can exist here, and what do we need to know about that life, and how does it form and function the interconnected relationships across all species of the planet. So that's what biodiversity in geography tries to look at, is all those common places and maybe now the less common locations. So when geographers and biogeographers start to map and identify location with species, we start at the big scale, life zone assemblages, and these are like determined by the primary vegetation conditions there. Are they trees? What type of trees? Are they conifer trees? Are they deciduous trees? Are they palm trees? What are those tree types? And then we'll divide the mapping system or the locational system out between tree types or vines or shrubs or grasses or mosses. What are the zones where the primary vegetation is a tree or a moss? All right, so that's where we're starting from. These big zones are assemblages, these life zones on that scale are called biomes. And biomes across the globe can occupy many different locations across 2 or more continents often. And with that, biomes are going to have similar structural characteristics. So if I was to put you in the prairie in North America, in Kansas, and have you look around and describe it, and then teleport you to the Ukraine and their grassland, you're going to say, hey, I'm in Kansas still. Like, it looks so similar that I can't tell a difference. The system that you were in Kansas and the system that you were in the Ukraine is one biome. So we've got a map of biomes here for you coming up right away to have a look at so you can see those relationships. Biomes are primarily driven by similar climate conditions, which is why we had to get through to discussing climate before we could talk about ecosystems and plants and animals. So it's climate that is the big dictator of what exists where. And so the biomes that we're going to talk about in this unit are as follows. And what I want you to really recognize here as you're looking through all of this graphic with all of these different names that are coming across is I've labeled the biome name with the same color that the biome is mapped out as. So the tundra is this gold color, and you can see that it stretches over the highest latitude of the northern hemisphere. We don't have anything equivalent in the southern hemisphere, and that's a function that really the southern hemisphere is mostly aquatic. From that, we've got the boreal or the taiga, which is this brick red color. Dry steppe, which is this dark brown. We've got a sliver of it here and a sliver of it across here. Adjacent to that, we've got grassland environments, which is this taupe color. From taupe, we've got this deciduous, which is kind of hiding in terms of its color here, but we're looking at most of the eastern part of the United States, a good portion of Europe, and then this chunk right here in Mongolia, China, Korea, and Japan. And then you see some of that same biome down here in Australia as well. So those are some of the big ones across the high latitudes and the mid latitudes. As well in the mid latitude, we've got this sort of Kelly green here across the Mediterranean. Parts of Australia and South Africa is the Mediterranean biome. As well, we've got a desert biome, which is this sort of sunny yellow color, and that comes across this latitude right here. So if we kind of cut across the same latitude, we're going to see most of this hot, dry desert location here. Same latitude in the southern hemisphere we come across, and we see that those same deserts are associated with these same sort of latitudes. I want to remind you that the equator passes right through here, all right? So most of the landscape that we have on planet Earth is in the northern hemisphere, and a very small portion is in the southern hemisphere, all right? And that's important because it's going to drive which ecosystems exist or don't exist in each hemisphere. So we consequently don't really have a tundra in the southern hemisphere. We do not have a boreal forest in the southern hemisphere because there just isn't a landscape that's going to provide a venue for those ecosystems to emerge. With that, what we haven't really looked at here and which is left are a couple of rainforests. I've got the tropical rainforest here and here as well. That same tropical rainforest is coming across China, India, Sumatra, Java, the Philippines, parts of Australia. Different from the tropical rainforest is the temperate rainforest, all right? It occurs a little higher in latitude. So here we are in the most southerly part of Chile. And then this same temperate rainforest is in Washington State up through British Columbia and parts of Alaska. Okay, lastly, now we've got this Savannah landscape, all right? And Savannah is, again, in and around the intertropical convergence zone, this lower latitude environment that exists on either side of the equator, all right? And you're seeing a skiff of it right here in Australia. We've got some of it in Madagascar, some of it in India, and then a little bit here on the Tibetan Plateau. All right, so keep these locational associations in mind as we progress through these slides.